Hello everyone and welcome back. I have a question for all of the women listening to this. What is a pair of leggings worth to you? I mean a really nice pair of comfortable leggings. How much are they worth? Perhaps $50, $75, $100. Whatever your answer is, I'm sure you didn't think to yourself that they're worth a life. Welcome back to another episode of The Unthinkable. Today's episode is particularly disturbing, so as always, viewer discretion is advised. Our story today takes us to the city of Bethesda in Maryland. Bethesda is a thriving urban center near the nation's capital, known for its ethnic restaurants, arts venues, and shopping retailers. It's a place where the average income is more than double the national figure, with the average household earning nearly $179,000 a year. But in today's episode, we'll find that not everyone in Maryland is living the high life, and the perception of wealth can be toxic. Lululemon Athletics is one of the most popular clothing brands in the world. It's a Canadian-based yoga-inspired brand of clothing that was founded in 1998, and its popularity skyrocketed in 2010 and has become best known for its leggings in particular. With this in mind, it doesn't come as a surprise that young women may want to work for the Lululemon brand part-time or perhaps even full-time to get an inside look at new apparel and maybe even secure a discount or two for themselves. But on March 12th, 2011, Lululemon would become the talk of the town for reasons outside of their popular apparel. That morning, just before 8 a.m., a store manager of Lululemon named Rachel Ordley would arrive to open up the store, but as she pulled out her keys to unlock the door, she noticed the door was already unlocked. This was odd, but Rachel just assumed that another employee had arrived before her and opened up or had perhaps forgotten to lock up the night before. As she pushed the door open and stepped inside, the scene before her held her frozen in her tracks. The store lights were on, and from what she could see standing in the doorway, it appeared as if the store had been ransacked. There were articles of clothing and accessories on the floor. Cabinets were flung open and various items were thrown about. As she observed the chaos in front of her, she wondered to herself, were we robbed? Had the store been vandalized? What was going on here? As she reached for a cell phone, she very cautiously and reluctantly called out to anyone that might be still inside. And as she did, that was the moment she heard a disturbing moaning sound coming from the back area. However fast she thought she was running, she felt like she couldn't get out of the store fast enough before sprinting out of the door and to the street where she frantically called 911. While standing outside, she noticed another person waiting just next door outside of the Apple store. In a panic, she explained to the man standing there named Ryan that she'd heard a distressed moaning sound and asked him if he would accompany her back inside to check and see if there was anyone hurt. Ryan agreed, and while he made his way toward the back of the store, Rachel waited near the front door. Moments later, she could hear Ryan yelling from the back area to call the police. "I think someone is dead," were the next words to come out of her mouth as she desperately explained the situation over the phone. Ryan had stumbled upon the sight of something that would change his life forever. He couldn't have possibly foreseen the gruesome scene that awaited him. He discovered a body lying face down in a pool of blood, and that wasn't all. He told Rachel that there was another woman tied up in the bathroom, barely breathing, but alive. Obviously, a violent assault had taken place. Rachel placed another call to 911 to report what they'd found. The Montgomery County Police would respond to the 911 calls and arrive to discover the disheveled scene Rachel had just described over the phone. Aside from the disarray of items everywhere, on the floor were two sets of shoe prints that had obviously trampled through the blood-soaked surface of the floor, one big and one small. As the police made their way through the store to the back area, they discovered the non-responsive body of a young woman that belonged to 30-year-old Jayna Murray. Rachel knew that Jayna was an employee of the store and had worked the closing shift just the night before. They also discovered the badly shaken body of another young woman named Brittany Norwood. Both of her hands and legs had been zip-tied, and it was apparent that she had suffered multiple cuts on her chest, arms, legs, and face. Her clothing was also torn and tattered. Worried about her condition, they immediately rushed Brittany to the hospital while they began processing the scene. Once she was considered stable, she began explaining to the police what happened the night her and Jayna were viciously attacked. She told the police that she and Jayna were closing the store together. But after they left, she realized that she'd forgotten her wallet. But because Brittany and Jayna barely knew one another, Brittany called another store associate to ask for Brittany's number since she didn't have it. Once she was able to get her cell number, Brittany called Jayna and asked her if she could come back and open up the store so she could grab her wallet. Brittany said that while the women were inside of the unlocked store, two masked men rushed in and attacked both her and Jayna. She said that the men tied them up and sexually assaulted them. But when Jayna resisted, they began beating her and eventually stabbed her to death. This made Brittany realize that there was no way out, and that she would have to do exactly what the men asked if she wanted to live. Although she was beaten and cut up with a knife, she was ultimately spared because, according to Brittany, the men said that she was more fun. This first-hand testimony was enough for the police to ask for a medical examination on both women to preserve any DNA evidence and classify the incident as a robbery-turned-homicide that included attempted murder. Armed with descriptions of the suspects from Brittany's testimony, they set out on a manhunt to track down the perpetrators. Based on their report, they were looking for two men, one around 6 feet tall and the other around 5 foot 3 inches tall. But after days of no progress, investigators began piecing together the crime scene and holding several interviews with Brittany to collect more information. Some time passed, and Jayna's family eventually attended a memorial held for their daughter in front of the Lululemon store that had remained boarded up since the incident. Meanwhile, days turned to weeks, and by April, they still knew nothing about their daughter's case. But they would soon hear of rumblings with stunning news that an arrest had been made. The authorities had arrested none other than Brittany Norwood. Jayna's parents were just as shocked as everyone else. Unbeknown to Brittany, while police were conducting multiple interviews with her, they'd also spent 6 days collecting evidence and figured out that her story wasn't adding up. The final straw to break the case open was when they collected Brittany's blood and DNA from inside of Jayna's car. And I know what you're thinking. A car? How did Jayna's car come into play? But all would be revealed during Brittany's trial that took place months later on October 26, 2011. And what the jurors would hear was beyond chilling. It was a plot for murder. As investigators dug into the background of Brittany Norwood, they discovered a troubled past filled with lies and thievery. Brittany was one of 9 children who had grown up living a very modest lifestyle. However, by the time she was in high school, she'd received attention for her exceptional athletic skills and was eventually recruited to play as a defender on the women's soccer team at Stony Brook University on a scholarship. She started college in the year 2000 and played until 2003, when accusations began to turn up accusing Brittany of being a thief. And it wasn't just her teammates that were accusing her, but also classmates and roommates. This behavior became such commonplace that eventually everyone considered it a running joke, that she was known as the campus thief. One of her soccer mates and former best friends said that she was a very sweet girl, but they had a falling out over Brittany stealing money and a designer t-shirt from her. As more accusers came forward, Brittany was eventually expelled from the university, losing her scholarship deal. After this, she moved to Washington, D.C. to live with her sister and took up a job working at the William Intercontinental Hotel. This seemed to be a step in the right direction as she quickly moved up in the ranks and was promoted to managing all VIP guests within the hotel. And as successful in this field as she was, she still held athletic ambitions and decided that she would become a personal trainer. With this newfound goal, she began applying for work at fitness studios in the area, which ultimately landed her at Lululemon Athletics. But it turned out that Brittany hadn't changed her ways much at all. Managers and employees had begun suspecting her of stealing, but had no hard evidence to support their suspicions. So they implemented a new policy. Before associates left for the day, they were to conduct a bag check. And on the night she and Jayna closed the store, Jayna performed a bag check and had found a pair of leggings that Brittany intended to steal. At this point, it's unclear of what transpired between the two, but by this time, it was clear that Jayna knew Brittany was stealing from the store and would have to report it to management. Investigators believe that shortly after is when Brittany concocted a plan to confront Jayna. Now, it's unclear how the initial attack unfolded, but investigators believe that at some time after returning to the store, Brittany physically attacked Jayna. Employees that worked next door in the Apple store recalled hearing strange noises and what sounded like pleading from a female coming from the Lululemon store. They can be seen on camera listening intently through the walls of the Apple store, but ultimately did not act on what they'd heard.
Take a look at this video, and in it you saw it first here on ABC7 yesterday, by the way. In this video, Bethesda Apple Store employees can be seen listening at that back wall there that separated them from the Lululemon store.
And on the other side of the wall, Jayna Murray was being brutally murdered. Brad Bell live in Bethesda now with what they heard. Brad?
Well, Allison, it may help to understand the story to see this. This is the Apple store. Just over there is the Lululemon store. They are separated by that one wall, that very common shared wall. The people on this side heard what was going on in the Apple store. They did not call police. That was documented in that video, and that is what's causing the community outrage. It's an unremarkable snippet of video. Two Apple Store employees stand next to the shared wall between Apple and Lululemon and then walk away. Unremarkable, save for the fact that what they heard there turned out to be the murder of Jayna Murray, and yet at the time, they didn't call police.
I think it's really unforgivable that someone didn't pick up the phone and call. It's that simple.
If I was screaming for help, I would have wanted someone to call the police. It's really a tragedy.
The woman in the security video is Jayna Sverzo. She testified at the trial of Brittany Norwood that last March 11th, she heard women arguing in the Lululemon store. She said one yelled, quote, "Talk to me, don't do this, talk to me, what's going on?" She says that was followed by screams, yelps, yells, and then, as the voice faded, she said she heard a woman say, "God help me, please help me." The man in the video is Apple manager Ricardo Rios. He testified that he thought the noise was just, quote, drama. As for the Apple security guard, he ignored it all as he listened to music.
I still can't understand why they didn't do anything.
That was Hugh Murray after Brittany Norwood was sentenced to life without parole for the murder of his sister Jayna in the Lululemon store. During that sentencing, the judge harshly criticized the Apple workers for what he called their callous indifference.
We still haven't even gotten a sympathy card from them, Apple Corporation, anything.
The Apple workers did help detectives unravel Brittany Norwood's claim that two robbers and rapists killed Murray, but clearly the belief lingers in Bethesda that more could have been done.
At trial, all of the evidence collected was put on display for the jury. The authorities first began questioning Brittany's story after several inconsistencies in her interviews were made. She claimed that she and Jayna had been sexually assaulted, but there was no DNA evidence on either of them to support this claim. Another lie she was caught in was when she told the police that she had never been inside of Jayna's car, but they'd found evidence on the inside door handle that said otherwise. Brittany likely realized they would find that evidence, and during her third interview, she had more details to add to her story. She claimed that at one point, the masked men ordered her to leave the Lululemon store and move Jayna's car. When detectives asked her why she hadn't used this opportunity to escape and drive away to get help, she cited that she was too afraid because the masked intruders had her ID and knew where she lived. But investigators say that she actually moved Jayna's car 3 blocks away for reasons that are still quite unknown, and sat for more than 90 minutes inside while she worked on creating a plan to explain her way out of what she'd done. And when they told her that her story wasn't making much sense, she became visibly frustrated and said that she wanted to go home. Detectives also found it strange that the masked men only used items from inside the store to assault the women and hadn't brought anything of their own to aid them. Brittany's story was falling apart. For 6 days, investigators collected evidence from inside of the store, including multiple shoe prints. Half of those prints were from Brittany, and the other half were from a size 14 display shoe that they said Brittany had used to stamp footsteps around the store using Jayla's blood to make it seem as if one of the men had worn it. Among the evidence were 8 different murder weapons that Brittany had used to torture and kill Jayna, including a wrench, hammer, box cutter, and a merchandise peg. All of these were items collected and used from inside of the store. This was a brutal beating and a bloodbath that left over 331 separate injuries to Jayna, including 105 defensive wounds, meaning that she'd been alive for the vast majority of the attack. She was hit in the head with a metal bar from a shelving rack, and the blow that ultimately killed her was likely a stab wound to the back of her neck that severed her spinal cord and went all the way through to her brain. This was an attack that was so brutal that left injuries so gruesome that Jayna's family were forced to have a closed casket at her funeral. At the end of her trial, the Montgomery County jury deliberated for just 21 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. Jayna's family was adamant about Brittany serving a life sentence and not being eligible for parole, to which the judge agreed and sentenced her to life without the possibility of ever receiving parole. But Brittany wasn't done. In 2015, she contested her conviction on the grounds that Maryland state law guarantees circuit court defendants the right to appeal. Her lawyers claimed that she hadn't received her Miranda rights warning early enough in the investigation, which meant she was improperly questioned by authorities. However, the appeals court rejected this claim and upheld her first-degree murder conviction, stating the evidence of Norwood's guilt was overwhelming. This ruling effectively ended all of Brittany's appeal options, and she is currently serving her life sentence at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. What we now know is that the promising future and life of Jayna Murray was cut short over a pair of leggings and the discovery of a conniving thief. May Jayna Murray rest in eternal peace.